Today on Ministry Monday, I'm speaking to Donna Kinsey. Hi, Donna. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fine, thank you. I'm glad you're doing well.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you. To the listeners who don't know, you and we met each other over the summer as you were preparing to go to the Handbell Festival in Louisville, Kentucky. And
Right.
um, and so it's so nice that we were able to meet in person. And it's nice to chat with you today about a topic near and dear to your heart,
Uh,
handbells.
oh, yes. There's a handbell on my license plate because my license plate says music.
That's
And then
right.
there's a bell on it that my husband cut out of contact paper and put on. So people always know it's me.
That's funny. That's wonderful. So today we're going to talk about bell choir beginnings. What I would love to cover today is really if someone is listening and they are either a seasoned music director or someone who might be brand new as a music director in their parish and they want to start a bell choir, but I want to start and just say like they have nothing, they've never had one, they don't have any materials. Like, what's the very first thing that a music director would want to start to consider if they want to start any type of bell choir?
Well, first of all, you probably need to explore and see if people would maybe be interested in being in one. And there's a lot of people that start with children, but there's been a flip in the last 15, 20 years that adults are very interested in playing. And back in the 60s and the 50s, we started with our kids. And now those kids have grown up and they wanted to still ring. So there's a lot of interest with adults. And um, there are some adults that just like, okay, especially after COVID, I want to do something creative. I want to make music. And so don't be afraid to do adults or children. Um, I dearly love my high school kids, but it's hard to get high school kids because they're so busy with so many things. I think you need to let them grow into that. But if you've got some high school kids that want to make music, go for it. Now, I need to tell you, the first bell choir I rang in, that's how I learned to ring. It went from fifth grade to 80.
Wow.
So it's an intergenerational thing. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to just children or just adults. Just if you can find at least probably 6 or 8 people, 10 would be ideal. But if you can find at least that many people that are interested in making music together and learning to ring, that's a good thing. And they don't necessarily need to know how to read music before they begin, because that's part of what this instrument does. It's very good at teaching people how to read music if you've got a good teacher to do that too. But you don't have to have an embouchure. You don't have to have wind control. It does help if you can see, but there are blind ringers as well, and there's systems for teaching the blind to ring, and there's also systems to teach people that are deaf to ring. Handbell Musicians of America have done so much research and worked with things. So don't feel that physical disabilities may be an issue. It does help if people can feel a beat. So if you're evaluating, well, maybe you have too many people that show up and want to ring. How do you decide which would be your best group to start with? And I'd say the best way to do is start by playing some music and see, can they move to the beat? If they don't have a good sense of beat, you're going to have a painful time. Um, I also like to see if they can bounce a tennis ball, because the idea of ringing a bell, handbell, or a hand chime on time is very important. It's a percussion instrument, and if you don't have a sense of anticipation so that the beat happens when you move your arm, that doesn't work so well. So if people can bounce a tennis ball to a piece of music that's a nice march type of piece, or a fun jive dance piece that has a good set beat to it, and if they can bounce a ball to it, it can be a bigger ball, but a tennis ball is about the right size that you would use for a handle in your hand. And you can see if they can do that. But I work with whomever God sends through the door. And so if they don't have a good sense of beat, then I do a lot of exercises and games and rhythm games for perception and cognition. That's a Delcros based thing by Bob Abramson. uh, Wonderful games for teaching all ages how to feel what music is about. So if you're not a music teacher, but you need some help, those are good games that would, and the instructions, the music is right there, teaching you how to move to things. But let's say you've got people that are interested, they're ready to go. Where do you get your instruments? And so I have a list of suggestions for that. Number one, check neighboring churches to see if any have them in their closets and will they loan them to you. And it can be any denomination, but there's a lot of places that had very active bell choirs at one time. And then it just fell off for one reason or another. And they're just sitting in a closet. Um, in the Catholic Church, we have, and the Methodist churches, there are many, and Presbyterians, as I'm thinking about it, and some Lutherans, there are churches that have closed. And I know I have a friend in Louisville that there were several Catholic parishes that closed. They knew that she did handbells, and she has a mission church in a poor section of Louisville. They donated the 2 octaves of bells to her because they were just going to sit in the church. They were just in there. So there's places where you can borrow things or maybe be gifted, but you may want to buy your own set. But there are schools and churches both that may have them sitting back, that the teacher that's there, the director that's there doesn't know what to do with them, and maybe they would be willing to loan them to you. There are some sets of things called handbells that I would not use with adults, but with very small children. And there's a set of about 8 bells or 10 bells, and they're color coded. And you ring them by pulling the clapper and shake, 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 shake. And they have no resonance, but you have to keep them going. That could be okay. They tend to look cute, not be a good musical instrument, but you have to start somewhere. And if you say, this is where we're starting, but you have a vision, I'd really like to have real handbells. Another way to get interest going is to invite an existing handbell choir from a school or a church to come and play for your people at a mass, or if you're having a choral concert or an instrumental concert, to have this visiting choir come and play. And most choirs are always glad to go play someplace if they can find a place. So they're very glad to be invited. But sometimes if you don't have a choir come, people don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
And so to have them come, I know my handbell choir was the first one in the Diocese of Wheeling, Charleston. We've been everywhere. And many denominations, all kinds of service organizations and things through the years, rest homes. Yeah, you just go and play because handbell ringers love to play and make music together. And so you need to find good venues for them. But once you get through the idea of how are you getting your instruments, there are many places to purchase them. There are handbell companies, Schomerick Handbell Company, Malmark Handbell Company, that are here in the United States. Um, there are some other companies across the world. I understand that the first handbell foundry that's in England is back in business again. They had been
Oh,
closed
really?
for, yeah. So Whitechapel is again selling bells and making bells,
Oh,
for which I'm delighted. And that's the set of handbells that I learned on, was Whitechapel back
oh.
in back in the 60s in Canning, Pennsylvania. So I had a very good experience. I got to ring for 2 months, and then the director retired and I was the director. So I know what it's like to be thrown in and not know what you're doing. But there are all kinds of helps for you if you don't know what you're doing and you want to have a bell choir, but where do you start? There's the organization Handbell Musicians of America that used to be called the American Guild of Handbell Ringers. And Handbell Musicians of America have a fabulous organization all across the country that each were divided by regions. And so you can contact those people. You can go to um, I will send you a handout that you can share with anybody that might be interested that would have all this information. And there are festivals, there are workshops, there are clinics that are offered by state level. And then there are regionals, and then there are national things. So they have it broken down for things. Um, there are many videos online. Brenda Austin at Hope Publishing. If you go to the Hope Publishing website, she has very small videos that just teach you basic things that you can look at that maybe are 2 or 3 minutes long, maybe 5, that it's not laborious and long, but that you can share with people if they think they would be interested. So there's all kinds of information out there. And now that we have things online, I did something for NPM during COVID about what do you do, because handbells are a percussion instrument we were allowed to play
Mm-hmm.
eventually. And so there's something in the files somewhere for NPM that they could also access. Um, there are some off-brand of handbells, some that have been made in India and some in Japan. I would explore those carefully and ask people around you. I haven't worked with most of them, and so I don't know how well they stay in tune. The instruments we have here in the United States with Schulmerich and Malmark are very fine-tuned individual instruments. You may get a good deal on Etsy, but then they might be so out of tune you can't use them. So
Right.
I wouldn't want people to spend their money unwisely. For hand chimes, some people like to start with hand chimes for their beginning instrument, and those are also available from Schulmerich and Malmark. And then Suzuki does have them as well. And so those are 3 companies that you would have a good quality instrument, because tuning is important, and you want them to sound good when you play instead of people going they sound awful. So you want a good thing. Um, there is some equipment that you would need to have besides the instruments. You would need pads for your table so that you don't damage your instruments. Handbells are made of bronze. It's a precious metal. And so you need to make sure you don't chip them and break them or crack them. With the hand chimes, they're aluminum, but if you don't have a pad to put them on, they make a lot of noise when you put them up and down. And sometimes people are very excited and they put things down too hard. And so having pads is helpful. Um, Jeffers Handbell Supply is a wonderful source. They send things all over the world, and they have a wide variety of things. And so that would be a good source to look for foam pads. And then covers, you can use tablecloths, or you can become more fancy as you go along. And there's all kinds of lists of things that can happen with that. One of the things that is of interest is, well, what music do you play? Where do you get it? What do you do? And if you don't have anything and you want to get a bell choir started, I would suggest starting with level 1 music. And the Handbell Musicians of America has worked very hard with publishers so that music is graded and you can see what level would work. And even if you have fine musicians that want to play, if they play band instruments or orchestra instruments, they're singers, they're piano players, I would still start with level 1, because you have a lot of skills that you need to learn, and being able to be precise and playing together instead of I'm at the piano. So I would play. You want your bells to do what we call a ching, that everything plays at the same time, instead of that doesn't lend itself to good experience for the audience, because it sounds like they don't know what they're doing, because they don't know what they're doing. And so you want to have real precision. And so as well as starting with level 1 music, if I was looking for solo pieces, I would also start, and I would start right away with my rehearsal this week, and we would play on Sunday to accompany something that the congregation's going to be singing, and we would support that sound. We would and give a new color of sound to what the people are singing. In the Catholic Church, we're a liturgical church. We sing the Gloria every week. We sing the Alleluia every week, except during Lent we don't do those two. But and the holy, holy, and the amen and things. So I would either, some of the masses that we use have some handbell parts written already, but if you're just starting, you might just want to play on beat one of every measure. Just see what chord is there and pick the bells that are in that same chord. So if you're doing the Mass of Creation, you would just start with a G minor chord and just maybe go back and forth between two chords there until Marty changes his harmonization then later on in it. But he's written handbell parts that go with it.
Hmm.
But you just, you want to start with something that's going to allow everybody to feel good. And if you're playing with everybody singing, then they're not spotlighted so much on what if I make a mistake? Then people won't notice so much, but you get the feel of what's going on. As an aside, I'm also a choral person. When I have my people sing and ring as much as I possibly can, their singing improves. Their intonation is so good because right under their ear, they've got the whole overtone series for those chords. And it really made a difference for my first choirs back in the 70s when I first started with singing and ringing together with that idea. It made a huge difference. And so if you're a choral director and your choir doesn't sing so well in tune, you might want to add some handbells to what they're doing, and that might help them with that. But it's easy to write a handbell chart. Jeff Honore has done lots of hymns, arrangements that are published by World Library, and some other people have done things. I'll send you those lists of suggested things that would work. But it's easy to look at your hymnal and see what the chord structure is and be able to write something that's going to go well. Now, if it's a public domain hymn, you don't have to get permission from anybody to do that. If it's a modern piece that's within the last 15, 20 years, you might need to get permission to say, can I add, I'm not going to change your harmonization. You have to tell the composers, I'm not going to change the harmonization, but I would like to add to what you've harmonized and by adding some bells to it. But you need to be legal and take care of your copyrights for that as well. Another tool that would be very helpful if you're doing handbells is to wear gloves, because the bells are made of bronze and that will tarnish, and your fingerprints are hard to get off after you've put your fingerprints all over them. And I suggest that you have polishing cloths so you can polish, or sunshine cloths. And Jeffers Handbell Supply out of Detroit, they all carry things like that so that you'd be able to use those. And just take good care of your instruments. That's one of the things at a rehearsal. Right away, I teach my musicians, how do you care for these instruments? I have handbells from the 1970s, and so we're still using them. And because you take care of them. Now, they have handles, and another reason to wear gloves, you can wear blisters. And so gloves do offer you some protection, as well as corn pads and moleskin. When you're playing a lot, when you first start, you're not going to get that. But when you've got a more advanced choir and you're rehearsing for an hour and you're ringing hard, you can just wear a hole in your skin. And so you need a little medical kit that, and we always have one that travels with us with every place we go, because especially at a bell festival, like we did in Louisville, you're ringing for hours a day, and it just can wear a hole in you, and then it's not fun to ring. So you want to cover up spots that would be there. But gloves help with that. There are black gloves, there are white gloves. The Raleigh Ringers that have performed for National Pastoral Musicians Convention in Raleigh a couple of years ago. And then Dave Harris was our director. He's their director. He was our director in Louisville. One of the fundraisers they do for their group is to tie dye gloves. Now, we don't use them in church, but we use them in rehearsal. It's a lot more fun when you've got pretty gloves that you can ring rather than plain black or plain white. So, but they're just a little too flashy for church, I think. But in the music room, in rehearsal space, I think that works. You also, for equipment, need to have sturdy tables to put your instruments on. You don't want a table that's going to collapse. For me to get a call from the Presbyterian Church here in town, in Morgantown, West Virginia, a few years ago, help, our bell table collapsed and all the bells smashed onto the floor, and they had a
Oh.
hard stone floor. They had to replace some castings because they cracked them. It just, you don't want your tables to collapse. So just putting up a little flimsy table and going, it'll be okay. Mm-mm-mm-mm. But there are nice ones like from Sam's Club that you can get, or plastic tables, but they're very sturdy.
Yeah.
But you always want to make sure that that bar that slides down, that the keeper over it is in good place, so that your bells are going to be substantially supported, especially if you're doing advanced techniques like marting or something like that, where you're putting a lot of pressure on the table. You do not want your table to collapse. But for the Presbyterian church, I felt so bad. Their table just collapsed. Nobody was around it or anything. They had the
Oh.
bells on the table. And so things just happen. So you want to
Hmm.
take as best care of your instruments as you can.
Hmm.
Um, when you're trying to figure out what to do and how to do, and I'm all by myself and I don't know what I'm doing, uh, you have the Handbell Musicians of America that you can reach out to. But in your town, there's liable to be somebody that knows how to ring if you're in a big enough town, because handbells are all over the place, and hand chimes. In Ohio, back in the 80s and the 90s, the state had an agreement that they would pay half for bells. And so a lot of Catholic schools got
Oh.
handbells and hand chimes, and some of them might be being used and some of them might not, but there might be supplies and things there that you could borrow. But there are lots of people in schools and churches that have had handbell experience and would maybe be able to help you. um, I'm always a resource. I'm always glad. Probably weekly or monthly, I get requests from people for, what should I do for this? Or can you help me with this? Can you look at this bell? They send me pictures. Do you think I cracked it? And it's not so much looking at it as hearing it. And
Hmm.
then what do I do? Or my handle broke. What do I do? And things. So, um, as I said earlier, there's probably bells and chimes in closets. Well, some of them may need to be refurbished because they may just be so old that the clappers are too hard and the bells don't sound good. They have a very harsh sound when the rubber gets too hard. Um, the handles are attached, but they might be loose. You don't want to have a clapper, or I mean, a whole casting go flying off. Um, there might be a spring that doesn't allow the bell to ring because it's broken. So you can get your handbells refurbished. And they're Schulmerich and Malmark both do that. Jeffers does that. One Note in Pittsburgh does that. They do a lot of refurbishing work and things, Christopher. And so there's all kinds of places that you can go to get help. And so don't feel like, oh, I found these things, but none of them work. And
Hmm.
I've had people that have brought cases to the music room and said, what do you think? What do you think we should do? And, you go through and there's only so much I can do. Sometimes you need to send them off. And then after they get so old, they need to be refurbished. After they're 10 years old or so, they're ready to have some tender loving care. And there are good people that know how to do that. And it'll sound like you have a brand new bell set. It's just like, oh my gosh, this is
Hmm.
wonderful. So those are things that help you get started. But what do you do at your first rehearsal? Well, you teach them how to read music if they don't know how to read music. I like to use flashcards. And even with the professional musicians, I like to work on what the shape of their ringing space should look like. It's not out in, it's a circle, and that you snap and you lift. If you're just going out in, you're going to be smacking the bell all the time. And handbell musicians have a reputation, handbell choirs have a reputation for just being clangy. Not good ones. Not if you're playing musically, but when you're going out and bang, bang, and every note is equal instead of having a flow of beat 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you don't play each quarter note equally, that you have to know. And boy, to develop that rapport in a group of people, that everybody understands that, so that G4 isn't playing a G4 solo every time they play. And I'm saying that because I had a 7th grade boy that just loved his G4, and he rang it as loud and as hard and as long as he could, but it just trying to convince people that they have to listen. I think the listening skills for handbell choirs and hand chime choirs are so important that they have to hear and understand they're part of a whole group, that they make music together and it's not just your individual bells. And how do you start people? Sometimes I start them depending on their skills, their music skills. I might start them with just one bell or one chime, but the ideal is to have two. It's so much more fun when you've got two. But then you have to learn how to ring parallel motion in front of you so you don't ring them together, because we have this point where our eyes bring everything together and you don't want that to be your bells or your chimes. So you have to learn to have a stroke that comes out from your shoulder and to lift. And as I said, Brenda Austin's videos, and there's many others online that you can watch. The Raleigh Ringers have many, many choir videos that you see what it looks like when a whole choir lifts their bells together and rings together. I call it a beautiful wall of sound, that sound just comes right at you. And it just, it looks good. They're a visual art as well as oral art. And I know that there's some bell choirs that play in balconies. I think I know that when we've played in balconies, in visiting churches and things, you'll see people get their mirrors out and look, or their phones out and flip it so that they can see, they can see and watch it, because you want to see them. And I think that's important, that your ringing technique looks good. And it makes for the musicality so much more when you've got a uniform stroke for a whole note, that everybody feels how much space it takes, and that a quarter note takes less space. But you don't want to sound like Woody Woodpecker with every quarter note in the same place. You need to ring up, 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 so that there's this lift and this breath. And one of the things, handbells are not wind instruments, but if you don't breathe and breathe together, you don't start together. You don't stop your sounds together. Damping is something you have to learn. Ellen Jane Lorenz was a force to be reckoned with in the early days of handbell ringing. She did not believe any bell should ever be damped. And so it could get a lot of chaos in the sound of what was going on.
Yeah.
You learn to damp judiciously. But if you're playing an accompaniment that's going along with eighth notes, you can do just like on a damper pedal, put down on the piano and let them ring. And then when the chord changes, then you damp them and you touch your body to do that. You have to bring it to your shoulder. And as you get to more advanced techniques, sometimes you do table damps because you have more than two bells. Now that's exciting. And what do you do when you only have two hands and you have to put something down? So those are advanced techniques that you work on. But to get started, in your first rehearsals, I would have rhythm cards, I would have flashcards, and work on getting a whole note stroke, getting a half note stroke, getting the quarter notes that they move up. And so that people are all working together. And then with level one music, you're not having to think hard about everything, because it's usually half notes and whole notes and some quarter notes added. And it may teach dynamics so that you're not playing loud all the time, and that you learn subtleties of how much energy it takes to get a good sound from a bell. And so those are all adjustments that people need to hear and work with their ears, and figuring out which bells they ring. And sometimes people have a hard time remembering what their bells look like. A lot of musicians are used to looking at a full score if they play piano or organ. If you play a string instrument or a wind instrument, then you have just a single line that you look at, but you're responsible for every note on the staff. Not in handbells. Unless you're playing a solo piece, then you're playing all by yourself, and that takes a lot of skill. But usually you have one or two bells. So I give a sticky paper with a staff and the note assignment that they can put right on their music, that they can see this is what I'm looking at, and figuring out where do you find them on the staff. And we usually give a space note and a line note that are right beside each other, so that you might be playing F and G, and the bells are divided by octaves. Middle C is called C5, And then you go up from that, or below that would be B4 below it. But C is where the number of the octaves change. And people ask me, well, how many octaves should I start with? Well, depends on how many people are interested. But I have a hard time living with just 2 octaves. It would go from G4, which is the top space on the bass clef, up to G6, which is above the treble clef. And you can make music with that, but then you're really limited to how many keys you can play in. And pretty soon you really want a low D or a low C, or, oh, if I just had that A6 up here. So we started back in the 70s with 2.5 octaves. And I had to get 3 because I just had to add those bells. But, money, what do you do? And so you fundraise, or people donate things. And so there are certain bells that, this is Mary's bell. This, my family bought this in memory of so-and-so, and things like that. And you can put labels in the bell handles that says who they were donated by, or who they're in honor of, or whatever. So you can, and the salespeople at the bell companies are very good at working with you to plan. How do you fundraise? How do you get the equipment and things that you need? And it takes space for bells, and you need cases to keep your bells in, or you have to have a closet or something with pegs that you can hang them, that they're substantially supported. That you just don't throw them in a crate. That doesn't work, because they need to be protected, because the lip of the bell is very fragile, and if it's getting nicked, then it can lead to a crack, and you don't want that. You don't want your bells to be damaged. But it happens. Things happen, and so the bell companies are glad to supply you with a new one. There are used handbells out there that you can buy. I know when I wanted to add another bell choir, and have my 2 bell choirs play together, sometimes I was able to buy a set of bells from the same age as my initial bells that had been in a school. And some of the bells had to be replaced because they had been really used hard. And the director that was selling them to me had them refurbished, had all the bells refurbished and replaced the ones that needed. And so then I have another set that's very nice that is able to be added. And as you get more advanced, sometimes you need more than one person playing the same bell, but at different places in the piece. So sometimes you need to have 2 C6s, or you need an A flat for somebody, but then somebody else needs it as a G sharp. So it's helpful to have 2 of things. So refurbished bells are very good to help with that when you're looking to do that. But it is expensive. And so you need help with figuring out how to plan. And it's very helpful if you've got people in your parish that are wanting to, or in your school that are wanting to help you get new instruments. And I find that one of the best ways to get help is talk about it. If you don't talk about it, people don't know what your dreams are and what you want. And I know I was hired to teach at a public school many years ago, and they looked at my portfolio and saw that I had a lot of handbell experience, and it was a brand new school. There was money for new things at this new school. And the principal said, well, what would you do if I said that maybe we could get some bells for you? I'd said, I'll take it. And so we got bells, and from Schulmerich, and I had kids that signed up the first day of school, because we had the dedication. Like, we started school on Tuesday and the dedication was on Sunday. So I just had them improvise ringing at random, and ending up on a big triumphant G major chord at the ribbon cutting ceremony. So we were ringing at random as people all came together, and then boom, so you don't always have to play something written on the page, but it helps if you have some harmony ideas, if you have some chord structure and things that you can go away from or add to. Because with chant, we have lots of things that we can accompany with handbells or hand chimes. Ringing at random, that means you're not playing on a steady beat, and that you're just the that you're just giving a background sound, but then you have to have a cantor or a choir that's able to get the right pitch.
Right.
I had one priest whom I dearly, dearly love. He could not get his pitch for the Gloria from a handbell. It didn't
Oh.
work.
Hmm.
The overtone series just messed him up.
Hmm.
He couldn't get which pitch he was supposed to start on. So you have to make sure you have good singers that can sing with him. But it's very nice. There's so many things you can do. It's so creative with things that you can just come up with, that you go, oh, I wish I had a piece of music for this. Well, there isn't one because it hasn't been written yet. So you need to figure out what you can do. And if you have instrumentalists in your music groups, to play with chimes, with flute. Um, I have some string players to have them play a solo, just the hymn tune. They can play the hymn tune, and we'll just play the chords underneath it to accompany them. So, I try, like I said, to work with whomever God sends through the door, and whatever their skill level is, figure out what it is, knowing that I'm not going to let them stay at that skill level. I'm going to be teaching them so that they can improve and be ready to share their gifts with their parish. And
Right.
parishes are very happy to have people participate in the liturgy other than just the priest and the altar servers and the readers. They like to have more things. So I think
Right.
that's a good thing.
Right. Well, Donna, your love for handbells is very apparent in our conversation. This has been a huge help, I believe, starting from the beginning and just like a handbell choir from the start, just slowly growing in what you can accomplish and build in a bell choir. And I think this was wonderful. To wrap up, you said you will be giving us a type of handout that we'll be able to put in the show notes, correct?
Right. Yes. I'll
Okay.
send
All right.
that.
That's
And
great.
it will have computer links. It'll have phone numbers and things so that you can contact people and organizations that would be helpful to you. Of course, I don't
Wonderful.
know your local needs, but I'm looking at the whole United States, and because NPM is everywhere, which is
Hmm.
wonderful, and things that we can look at for that. But the, it's not like you're all by yourself anymore.
Yeah.
We have the internet to help us, but it does help if you have somebody that just can come over, or you go to them and they can help you learn to ring. And I
Right.
suggest when somebody in Morgantown or in this area wants to learn how to ring and how to direct, I just say, come to my rehearsals. I almost always have somebody that's missing. Come learn to ring just by ringing, and then you'll understand the instrument and what's going on. So I'm sure other people would do that too.
I'm sure too. Donna, thank you, thank you, thank you for all of your work always on this topic, but especially for your time and sharing your expertise with us today here on Ministry Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.